I want you to picture something for a second. It's election night.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter where, doesn't matter when. You're watching the results, scrolling your feed, and then, the confetti cannons go off. One side's cheering, the other's predicting doom.
Right.
But deep down, do you ever get that sinking feeling, that sort of heavy, cynical thought that despite all the noise, nothing fundamental is actually going to change?
Oh, absolutely. It's the definition of political fatigue, that haunting suspicion that we're just swapping out the players, but the game itself is rigged. Or maybe broken is a better word.
Broken is a good word. You change the party colors, the slogans get a little catchier.
Yeah.
The ethical gaps, the corruption, that just seems to be the only constant.
It is.
And usually we just shrug. We say, well, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, and we just, move on.
Right.
But today we're looking at a source that challenges that resignation head on. And I have to warn you, the alternative it proposes is, well, it's radical.
Radical is putting it lightly. We are doing a deep dive today into a text called The Moral Revolution and the Governance of Sadvipras. It's from the discourses of P.R. Sarkar, the founder of PROU.
Progressive Utilization Theory. And reading through this, I realized this isn't just another political manifesto. It feels more like a blueprint for a completely different kind of civilization.
It really does.
We're not talking about tax brackets here. We are talking about replacing the entire engine of democracy with something the source calls moral force.
It's a fascinating what-if scenario. It asks a question that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, which is, what if governance wasn't a popularity contest?
Right.
What if leadership was strictly reserved for people who had rigorously proven, their moral and spiritual integrity first?
It sounds great on a bumper sticker, but the mechanics of it, that's where it gets complicated. So our mission today is to unpack this vision. We're going to look at the source's critique of why modern democracy fails, and it is a brutal critique.
It is.
And then we'll explore this concept of the Sadvipra, the spiritual revolutionary.
And we should probably start with that diagnosis. Because before Sarkar offers a solution, he pretty much dismantles the pedestal we put democracy on.
He really does. I was reading the notes, and honestly, I had to stop because the language is so sharp. He doesn't just call it democracy, he calls it foolocracy.
It's a provocative term.
It's aggressive. I mean, calling the voters fools seems like a great way to alienate, 99% of the population. Is he just being an elitist here?
It sounds incredibly harsh. But we have to look at the logic he's using. He's not necessarily insulting the intelligence of every single voter.
Okay.
He's critiquing the collected mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
The source also uses the term mobocracy.
Mobocracy, okay.
The argument is that in any population, true, deep wisdom, the kind you need to steer a country through a crisis, is rare. The source actually says wise people are always in a minority.
Right.
So if your system is based purely on the quantity of votes, not the quality of understanding, you inevitably get governance that reflects, mob psychology.
So 51% of the people can be manipulated or emotional or just misinformed, but they still get to decide the fate of the other 49% who might actually know better.
Precisely. It's the tyranny of the majority, but driven by emotion. And the source points out that this whole structure creates a very specific kind of victim. It talks a lot about the middle class.
This part really resonated, the silent sufferers.
Right. Think about the political dynamics in, say, India or even the United States. The source argues that politicians basically survive by purchasing votes.
Purchasing them? You mean like handing out cash?
Sometimes literally cash. In other places, it's what the text calls high-sounding assurances. It's populism. You target the people who are struggling the most, the educationally backward, the economically desperate, and you promise them the moon.
Okay, so the politician locks in the votes of the masses that way. What about the wealthy?
Well, the wealthy can usually afford to buy the politician, so they're fine. But then you have the middle class, stuck right in between.
The people in the squeeze.
Exactly. The source describes them as being educated enough to see through the cheap slogans. They know when they're being lied to, and they're financially stable enough that you can't just buy their vote with a small handout.
But not rich enough to own the lobbyist.
Correct. And that's the squeeze. They aren't numerous enough to outvote the manipulated masses, so they become voiceless. They're the silent sufferers watching the train wreck happen in slow motion.
That is such a specific kind of frustration. It's that feeling of paying your taxes, following the rules, seeing the corruption, and knowing your vote is just mathematically irrelevant against a populist wave.
And the source argues this is where the corruption cycle becomes unbreakable. Hypocritical leaders don't need the middle class.
They don't.
They just need to keep the majority distracted. The text says the middle class finds it very difficult to raise a voice of active protest because they're too busy just trying to, maintain their own standard of living.
It's the golden handcuffs. You're too comfortable to revolt, but too squeezed to ever thrive. But the source does drop a warning, doesn't it? It says this silence doesn't last forever.
No, it doesn't. Sarkar suggests that when a government actively works against the interests of the middle class, when their financial stress meets their developed intellect, that's the breaking point. That's when you get mass upheaval.
So the diagnosis is pretty bleak. A foolocracy where the wise are outnumbered, the middle class is crushed. I mean, if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, okay, great, thanks for the depression.
Right. But the source claims there is a fix.
Enter the Sadvipra.
Enter the Sadvipra.
Which sounds like a character class in a video game, but what is a Sadvipra in this context?
So it roughly translates to a spiritual revolutionary, but we have to be really careful with that definition. It's not just an activist or a rebel.
Okay.
A Sadvipra is someone who strictly adheres to the principles of yama and niyama.
I've heard those terms in yoga class, but I get the sense we aren't talking about stretching. What do they mean in a political context?
They're about character armor. Yama covers your interaction with the world. Things like satya, or benevolent truthfulness, ahimsa, not harming others, and asteya, which is non-stealing.
Non-stealing seems like a pretty low bar for a politician, though.
But it goes deeper. It means not taking what isn't yours, even intellectually, not depriving others. And then you have niyama, which is internal discipline, things like tapa, making sacrifices for others, and savaya, a deep understanding of oneself.
So we're not talking about a politician who just kisses babies at election time. We are talking about someone who lives like a monk but acts like a revolutionary.
Exactly. The argument is you can't fix a broken system with a better system. You can only fix it with better people.
Right. A structure is just a shell.
The Sadvipra is someone whose internal wiring is so disciplined that they can't be bought, they can't be bullied, and this is the key. They have no desire for power for themselves.
That's the critical distinction. They don't want the power.
Right. And the text uses this brilliant biological analogy. It compares society to a living body. If the government is the brain, the Sadvipras are the white blood cells.
I love that. Because white blood cells are aggressive. They don't negotiate with a virus. They
attack it. Exactly.
Yeah.
When the filth of immorality enters the social body, corruption, exploitation, the Sadvipra's job is to attack it. They are the society's immune system.
But this is where the source gets a little spicy. It uses some very active language. It says, conscious people must snatch away power from hypocrites.
Snatch away.
Yeah, that phrase made me pause. Snatch away power. That sounds less like an election and more like a coup. Is it advocating for, violent overthrow?
It's a delicate line. The source is basically saying that power in the hands of the corrupt is illegitimate. It's like a thief holding your purse. You don't ask nicely, you snatch it back.
Okay.
But the violence isn't necessarily physical. It's the force of moral authority. It's an assertion that ethical people have been sitting on the sidelines for way too long.
So it's a call to action. It's saying, if you're an ethical person and you're doing nothing while the country burns, you're a part of the problem.
Yes. It frames political apathy as a moral failing. If you have the consciousness, you have the responsibility.
Okay, so let's say these Sadvipras step up, they snatch the power back, then what? History is full of revolutionaries who become just as bad as the people they replaced. How does the system prevent that?
This is where we get into the structure. And honestly, this is the part that will probably spark the most debate. The source proposes a system called selecto-electional governance.
Selecto-electional? Sounds like a transformer, but it's a hybrid model, right?
It is. Sarkar divides government into two functions, the synthetic portion and the analytic portion.
Okay, let's break those down. Synthetic versus analytic.
The synthetic portion is like the legislative side lawmaking, the big picture. The source says this part can have an elected component. The people still have a voice.
So democracy isn't totally dead?
Not dead, just refined. Because then you have the analytic portion. This is the execution, the administration, the people who make sure the bridges actually stand up.
And the source says this part should not be elected.
Correct. The analytic portion is selected.
This is a really interesting idea. It's treating government less like a debating club and more like a specialized field.
Exactly. Think about a huge corporation. The shareholders might vote for the board of directors. That's the synthetic part.
They set the vision.
But the board of directors hires the CEO. They select the chief engineer. You don't hold a general election to decide who should be head of neurosurgery at a hospital.
Right. You don't want the most charming person operating on your heart. You want the one with the best hands.
That is the core argument. Why do we treat managing a nation's complex infrastructure as a popularity contest? Executives should be selected by a board of sadvipras, that moral leadership, based purely on efficiency and expertise.
So the sadvipras are like the nation's HR department. They vet the experts. They say, you're the best economist, you run the treasury, you're the best educator, you run the schools.
And crucially, if those selected officials fail, the board can dismiss them immediately.
Wow.
There's no waiting 4 years for another election while the country falls apart. It prioritizes accountability over the spectacle of campaigning.
I have to play skeptic here, though. This board of sadvipras, this group of moral guardians who select everyone else, who selects them, who decides they're the moral ones. Isn't this just a benevolent dictatorship?
The source actually uses that exact term, benevolent dictatorship.
See, that's where the alarm bells start ringing for me. Dictators usually start out benevolent and then...
Well, yeah, and end up not. It's a massive risk, and the source knows it. That's why it explicitly rejects individual dictatorship.
Okay.
An individual can always be corrupted. Instead, it proposes a dictatorial board. It's collective leadership. The idea is that a group of people, all living by those codes of yama and niyama, keep each other in check.
So it's a system of peer accountability.
Yes, and their authority doesn't come from guns. It comes from their moral standing. They're the white blood cells, remember. Their power is only valid as long as they're fighting the infection. The moment they become the infection, the source implies a new group of sadvipras would naturally rise to displace them.
It's a constant cycle of moral renewal. It's a different way of thinking about checks and balances. They're spiritual checks, not legal ones.
And speaking of checks, there is one other structural change mentioned that I think is incredibly relevant today: the separation of education and politics.
Oh, this one hit home. The source basically says universities need to stop being puppets.
It uses the phrase obedient servants. Sarkar's point is that in most systems, the government holds the purse strings for education. And because they pay the bills, they force the universities to teach what the ruling party wants.
We see this all the time. A new party comes into power, suddenly the history books get a rewrite. Or funding for climate science gets cut because it doesn't fit the platform.
The source argues this destroys the integrity of the mind. The proposal is radical. The state must finance education, fully fund it, but have zero interference in the curriculum.
Total independence.
Total. The educational system shouldn't change just because the prime minister changes. Truth is truth. The goal is to create good, healthy, and well-educated citizens, not voters who are indoctrinated into an ideology.
Separating the search for knowledge from the struggle for power.
Exactly. And that concept of separation leads us to the biggest idea in the whole document. Because none of this works without a fundamental shift in how we view the world itself.
The big aha moment.
Cosmic ownership.
Okay, this is where we pivot from political science to spirituality. Cosmic ownership. Explain that to me like I'm 5.
Okay, so imagine a house. You might live in a room, you might sleep there, but you don't own the house. You're a guest.
Okay.
The source states that the universe is created by the supreme entity. Therefore, the ownership of the universe lies with the creator, not the creation.
So nobody actually owns anything.
Not in an absolute sense, no. The source says everything is common patrimony. We're allowed to use it, we can enjoy it, but we are essentially caretakers.
That is a hard sell in a capitalist world where this is mine is the foundation of everything.
It is. But Sarkar argues it's the only thing that can truly unify a diverse world. Look at what divides us: language, territory. Those are all relative.
But the idea that we're all children of the same source...
That's absolute. If you genuinely believe in cosmic ownership, then hoarding wealth isn't just greedy, it's theft. It's stealing from the common inheritance. It shifts the entire mindset from competition to cooperation.
It's the spiritual glue that stops the infighting.
Exactly.
But then there is always a but. How do we get from here to there? Because right now, looking out the window, we are a long way from a benevolent board of yogis running the show.
The source outlines 2 paths. The preferred path is intellectual revolution.
Which is kind of what we're doing right now.
In a way. It's study circles, spreading ideas, making people conscious of their rights. Proutists are supposed to engage in ideological education. You wake people up. You use democratic methods to help sadvipras get elected to local councils. You change the culture from the bottom up.
Change from within.
Yes. But the source is also realistic, or maybe ominous. It warns that if the government remains hostile, if the corruption is too deep, and if laws are not strong enough to fix it,
Then what?
then physical revolution is inevitable.
That sounds intense.
It says suffering humanity won't wait forever. If the intellectual revolution is too slow, the physical one happens. It's described as inevitable and irresistible.
It reminds me of that JFK quote, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable."
That's the one. But the tone of the source isn't fearful. It's actually incredibly optimistic. It sees this turmoil not as the end of the world, but as cleaning process.
A detox.
It says the filth of immorality is temporary. That's the key takeaway. The darkness isn't permanent. A moral force is rising. And whether it happens through ideas or through a mass movement, a moral society is seen as destiny.
That's a really refreshing perspective. We get so bogged down in the daily grind of corruption that we forget that systems can change. They have before, they will again.
That's the power of this deep dive. It reminds us that democracy, as we know it, isn't the end of history. It's just one stage. And maybe the next stage is demanding our leaders actually pass a character test.
So let's bring this all together. We started with a critique of foolocracy, the idea that mob rule and vote buying leaves us stuck.
We looked at the Sadvipra, the ethical revolutionary who acts like society's immune system.
We explored the selecto-electional model, electing on policy but selecting on expertise, treating government with the seriousness of brain surgery.
And we grounded it all in cosmic ownership, that we are caretakers of a shared world.
It really challenges you to rethink what you expect from leadership. In a world drowning in information, the idea that we should prioritize character yama and niyama over charisma, it feels almost radical.
It is radical, but maybe that's what we need. We spend so much time analyzing polls and sound bites. This source asks us to analyze the integrity of the people asking for our trust.
Which brings us to the big question for you listening right now. And I want you to really sit with this one.
Here's the thought. If we stopped choosing leaders based on who creates the best sound bites or who promises the most free stuff, and we started selecting them based on who could pass the strictest test of moral integrity, what would our country look like tomorrow?
Would we even recognize it, or would it be the start of something completely new? That's something to mull over.
It certainly is.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Goodbye, everyone.